The following tales are found from various corners of the internet. All tales claim to be true unless otherwise specified, but take every story with a grain of salt. Any material used in the following stories will be linked in the description. Now, pull up a chair and gather round for a spooky session of Lion's Fireside Chats. This was about 2006 or so, when I was a college freshman. Every weekend I would go home for a couple days, since I went to school about 20 minutes away from my parents' house, and then come back on Sunday. I'd take off one Friday, and come back on Sunday afternoon to a visibly disturbed roommate. I asked him what happened, and he starts telling me the story from the previous 2 nights. Both Friday and Saturday night, right around midnight, Patrick had been woken from his sleep by a chill running from the tip of his nose up to his forehead. And when he opened his eyes, there was something hovering horizontally over him. He described it as a cloaked figure, but there was no person actually wearing the cloak, just an empty space. However, there were a pair of eyes floating where eyes would normally be in the hood, but they were bloodshot and the whites were yellow, and instead of round black pupils it had white cross shapes. Patrick said that it spoke to him, in French, and he flailed at it instinctively as soon as it did. It vanished. The same thing happened on Saturday night. Same time, same chill up the bridge of his nose, same crazy eyes and invisible cloaked figure. When I asked what it had said to him, Patrick said that it was speaking an old dialect of French, basically the French equivalent of Shakespearean English, saying things like,
"It's your time. I've come for you. You'll never be rid of me."
And so on. At the time this happened, I was a complete straight edge, had never even smoked a joint, and only drank a bit of wine with the family on holidays, so I was extremely skeptical, especially because Patrick was both a smoker and a drinker. So I started asking some questions, taking it all with a grain of salt. Patrick started telling me a backstory, which helped give some context to why he was so perturbed by what he thought he had seen. When he was a small child, maybe 2 or 4 years old, Patrick drowned in a lake in France, where he was born and raised until his family moved to America. When his father pulled him out of the water, he gave him CPR while shouting in the same ye olde French,
"You can't have him! It's not his time!"
and other such things. The dad was able to resuscitate Patrick, and they went on with their lives without further incident until now, in college. Now, this all seemed incredibly unlikely to me at the time, so I told him, in retrospect this was a terrible idea, to speak to the thing he'd seen, and to tell it, in the old French, to appear before us. Patrick spoke a few words in a commanding tone, demanding the apparition show itself. Within seconds, the temperature in the room plummeted. We're talking maybe 10 to 15 degrees in a matter of seconds, to the point where both Patrick and I were visibly shivering. I was fully clothed and Patrick was just in his boxers, but it seemed to affect us equally. Just then, he starts screaming,
"Ah, shit, it burns!"
And as I watch, a series of 3 long, raised welts start appearing across his chest. I want to stress here that I watched this happen, and that he was in his boxers previously during the whole story session. He did not scratch himself, rub upon anything, or eat, drink, touch something that would have given him an allergic reaction. These welts seriously showed up out of nowhere, and they looked like someone had taken a very sharp knife and dragged the back end firmly across his skin. 2 of the welts were horizontal, about 10 inches long, one a few inches below the nipple, and the other about 3 to 4 inches below that. The 3rd welt crossed over the 2 in a diagonal slash. It's kinda hard to describe, so I'll use a visual, but the welts were highly raised and slightly indented in the center, like this. So Patrick is shouting that the welts on his chest burn and hurt, and between those and the temperature drop, I'm beginning to get concerned myself, since I can't really determine what's going on. I had a passing interest for supernatural stuff at the time, and did absolutely every beginner protection type of ritual that I could recall. I sprinkled salt at the thresholds of the doors and windows, lit a white candle, and drew a protective rune on our whiteboard on our door. No idea if anything actually worked, but I was desperate and kind of freaked out. And fortunately, nothing else happened that night, although we stayed awake the entire time to be sure. In the morning, the welts on Patrick's chest were gone. The next day, I go on to class as normal and told one of my friends about what had happened. She was a Wiccan or some other new agey type thing and was shocked at the story. She called a few of her friends, and that afternoon they all met me at my dorm hall, even though I had never told them which one it was. My friend and 2 other ladies from her coven, or whatever, came into my hall and started walking towards my room. I want to point out that, again, none of them had been to my room or even knew which number it was, but they all made a beeline directly for it. About 15 feet from the door, they all stopped in the hallway and said, "It doesn't want us going any further." The leader of the group made protective charms for both Patrick and myself, using a small silver bell and a few other items, and that was pretty much the end of the issue. As far as I know, Patrick never takes his charm off and hasn't seen the thing since. A few days after this happened, a friend of mine who was a history major heard my story and my description of the pattern of welts that raised upon Patrick's chest. He said that back when people were drawn and quartered as punishment, they would be cut in 3 places on the torso to ensure that the body was properly pulled apart, and that those 3 places were almost identical to where Patrick got scratched. Not sure how accurate this is, but it would be a disturbing aspect of the story if true. After all was said and done, I also made a very crude Photoshop of the thing Patrick saw, going off his description. This is it. I've always tried to be skeptical about this story, generally speaking, since it's the closest I've come personally to something paranormal. But there are a number of things that I can't actually explain, like the welts or the temperature drop. Hopefully some of you might have some insight for me into what we experienced. On the other subreddit I posted my story to, some people suggested that it may have been an Anku, which would fit the time period for the language it was speaking and location, at least.
My name is Matt, and I consider myself a skeptic. I'm non-religious and don't want to believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I've had experiences that make doubting just a bit harder. I'm 32, and at the end of high school I went to work at a local video store. This storefront had been a video store twice before when I was growing up, but it closed down, and a local company called Potomac Video, DC MD VA residents will know the place, tried their hand at the same location. Anyway, I worked there, and ended up doing quite well and became a shift supervisor. I love movies, so it was perfect for me. I ended up having many shifts with a lady who had worked for the previous 2 video chains in the same spot. Her name was Mary, and we got along quite well. It wasn't long before I noticed odd banging noises in the store when it was completely empty. These sounds were as if large, heavy VHS tapes in their cases were falling off of shelves and hitting the ground in various places around the store. But I would never find any of these tapes on the ground. Occasionally I'd even hear what sounded like someone smacking something on the top of the wall, right behind my head at the register. It clearly wasn't anyone in the shop besides us because A, that would sound different, and B, it would happen when the shops were completely closed and no one was there. I asked Mary if she was noticing these odd sounds, and she matter-of-factly said, "Yeah, that's just Bob. He's haunted the shopping center for years." At first, I just kind of rolled my eyes at the suggestion, but she insisted that there was something behind it. She told me that back in the 70s, a good portion of the same shopping center, which included the spot where our video store sat, was part of a large drugstore, and sadly, one of the firefighters died trying to put out the blaze. She was even able to bring in the newspaper clippings about the event, so someone had died where I was working. Couple that with the odd sounds and uneasy feelings I got when I was there alone. You can imagine how I felt. Now, Bob was never nasty or malicious as far as I could tell. He was mischievous, sure, but it always felt good-natured. We'd even wish him a good night when we'd close the store, which would often be met with a smack sound from within the store somewhere. Now, as a key holder and a shift supervisor in a store like this, there are the times when you would need to close and then open the store. Comes with the territory. So, one week I was doing this because my manager was out of town, and I gladly accepted. It was your standard shift. I closed the store around 9 p.m., did the cash drops, ran whatever reports I had to get done, all that good stuff, and got out around 9:30 I'd say, but it could have been closer to 10 p.m. I set the alarm, went home and slept for a few hours, and went back to open the store alone. When I got there, I noticed that something was not right. At the front of the store, we had shelves that were similar to those at the center, but they were for the used VHS tapes that we had for sale. When I went into the store, the first sale rack was empty, and all the tapes were scattered across the floor on either side of it. And if that weren't enough, the sign that was attached to the top of the rack was off, laying about 20 feet away from the front of the store. These signs weren't screwed in or anything, but they were made of some sort of metal, and to remove any of them took quite a bit of effort. I'm not a small guy by any means, but it would take me maybe 10 seconds to wiggle and pry one of those from the top of the racks. I couldn't imagine what could have caused the sign to dislodge itself and fly so far into the store when it took that much effort just for a strapping young guy such as myself to take it off in the first place. I took a bit of time trying to shove the sign back into the rack, and as I did, I contemplated if one of the other key holders could have done this as a prank. The only other people who could have done it were the manager, who was out of town, Mary, who had a sense of humor but took the job seriously enough to rip into someone who would fuck with their fellow employees like that, and my district manager, who clearly would not have done it. This is not proof of the paranormal, and I accept that, but to this day, it makes me wonder what went on there that night. There are other similar but smaller experiences that I had working there for like 2 or 3 years, but this is the one that really sticks out to me. Thanks, Bob, for making my experience there even more interesting. This story happened during my junior year of high school. All 4 years, this girl named Adriana attended with me. I knew very little about her. She didn't go to my middle school or the one across town that my classmates were from. Her parents were never present at school either, and it seemed like she was self-reliant, even as a freshman. I had never had any problem with the girl. Still, since I met her my sophomore year, I had the gut feeling I should be careful around this girl. Whenever I was around her, I could feel myself grow tense. Defensive, but not in the way I would grow tense around mean girls or self-centered jocks. In the way that I would grow tense around large, unleashed dogs. The best way to describe my fear of her was animalistic. It wasn't a human or socialized sort of terror. Junior year, she was in my first period English class. This took place the day before winter break. My teacher allowed us to bring sweets in since the day was just basically an excuse to eat food and watch Christmas movies. Adriana baked cookies and brought them in. However, before class started, her and her friend went up to the screen to pick a movie, and this is where things got unusual. I was glancing at the movie choices, eating one of Adriana's cookies, and I noticed something unusual. Her eyes had gone completely white. For a moment, I thought that maybe she was rolling her eyes and I just caught her at a bad moment or angle, but I kept staring and learned that that wasn't so. Her eyes stayed white, and even though her pupils were gone, it felt as though she was looking at me. A large, toothy grin made its way across her face, but it wasn't sweet or innocent. It was malicious, and I could sense danger lurking in it. That fear of her went off again, and I broke eye contact. I was so freaked out that I didn't touch my food for the rest of the class period. I'd only eaten her cookies, and I grew very sick for the rest of the day. I was nauseous, but I couldn't vomit. I was always dizzy and everything smelled very metallic. Like I'd said, I had only eaten her cookies, and after her sick grin that morning, I wasn't sure what was going on. The nurse's office was closed that day and would just send me home if I went there. It's stupid now, but my friends and I were planning to throw our first party ever after school that day, and I knew that if my parents came to pick me up, they wouldn't let me go. So I opted to stay and suffer for the sake of getting drunk for the very first time. This all came to a head later that day, at the Christmas pep rally. As I mentioned, I was ill all day, and crammed into my school's basketball gym with about 5,000 other students only made me feel worse. Halfway through the rally, I was sure I was going to throw up, so I excused myself to the bathroom. Once I got there, the urge to vomit left, and I took a few minutes to breathe. Right as I was about to leave, a girl emerged from the stalls. Adriana. She was wearing the same smile from English. "You don't look so good, Millie," she said, glancing at my messed up hair and eyeliner. "Are you sick?" My instincts told me to run, but I didn't want to let her know that I was afraid of her. Something told me that was what she wanted.
Yeah, stomach thing. Eat something bad? She asked, smirking. You should go home. No, I'm okay. I'm just gonna head back to the assembly. I'll see you later, I said, a little awkwardly as I turned to leave. Millie, wait! I turned around, and there she was. Eyes completely white with a feral, unhinged grin. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to cry, scream, and pass out all at once. It was a terrifying image, and we were all alone in the girls' bathroom. She was only 3 feet from me, and I felt danger. But, once again, I got the feeling that's exactly what she wanted, was for me to be scared. And I didn't want to give her that. What, Adriana?
Merry Christmas.
Part of me wanted to stay and stare at her, try to figure out what the fuck was going on with her. But at that point, I just wanted to leave. You too. I turned around and forced myself to walk calmly into the entrance of the gym. My friends commented on my pale face and offered to drive me home, but I kept quiet. Just said that I was dehydrated, and cheered for my brother, who was on the tennis team when he walked onto the court. Until graduation, I caught Adriana smiling at me, with white eyes every once in a while during study hall or in class. But like I said, I got the feeling that she just wanted a reaction out of me, so I'd just ignore it. To this day, I have no idea what the fuck was going on with her, whether she was just a mean girl who wanted to mess with one of the Shire girls, or whether there was something truly sinister going on here. The last time I saw her was at graduation, when she did that sick fucking smile again and congratulated me. And I honestly hope that I never do again. You don't look so good, Millie. You got a pack of smokes, Millie? You been hitting it too hard? Doing the chain? You in the chain gang, Millie? You guys want to see the single greatest story I've ever seen in my entire life? Do ya? You think you're ready? Alright. Goes nothing. The Titty Man! What kind of name is that for someone who's supposed to be terrifying? The Titty Man. You read some good things looking for spooky stories, but this one, the Titty Man here, he really took the cake. This was the laugh I needed when everything else was scaring the shit out of me. So thank you, Nebbles1069. You're the realest MVP.